I'm going to talk today about my own programs in community and economic development. I think one of the cool things that Sarah's done is you're going to see some pretty dramatic differences across states in terms of how CED is handled. And so you'll see the Oklahoma experience here. And I do want to stress that these are just my programs that I'm talking about. We did have some other community economic development specialists. Some of you guys probably know Dave Scheidler and Nody Lansford, who have done work in this area, and I'll discuss a little bit about them. So this is the title slide here, and I'll just go quickly through what our community and economic development organization has looked like over time. I've been here for over 10 years now, and so I've had a little bit of historical perspective on what Extension has gone through over this time. You can see back in 2010, we actually had 4 extension districts, so we had quadrants across the state. And at that time, we had 3 faculty here in Stillwater on campus, and so it was myself and Dave Scheidler and Nody Lansford, who I mentioned. We did at that time also have 2 what we called area specialists, so one in the east and one in the west. And they, as you'll hear, they came to a lot of our programming. They were based in each half of the state, and they traveled that full half of the state and did our programs with us and really had a good feel for the county educators that wanted to be involved and that would be helpful to us. And so they were very, very useful. We also had dedicated county educators dedicated specifically to community and economic development in 4 counties. We have 77 counties in Oklahoma, and at that time we had 4 counties that had their own funding line for a CED educator. You can see how things changed between 2010 and 2015. We went through some budget cuts, like a lot of people, and we switched from 4 districts. We shrunk down to 3, so the entire West is now 1 district. We still have our 3 faculty on campus at that time, but we only had 1 area specialist. So you can see the East area specialist retired, was never replaced. So we only had 1 in the West. And he pretty much still stuck with the West. He tried to do some things in the East, but not a lot. And we also lost a couple of county educators. So we still had 2 that were dedicated to community and economic development. And you can see 5 years later where we currently are. We still have the 3 districts. We're actually down to 2 faculty on campus now. Unfortunately, Dave Scheidler left us for a great opportunity. We no longer have any area specialists. The other one retired, took another job, and has not been replaced. And we now, at this point, have no county educators that are specifically dedicated to CED. So you can kind of see this is one thing that's happened over time. I think you'll see some alternative variations on this in the other presentations that we'll see here in a second. And so you might be asking, how do you do CED with your county personnel? And so I put together this kind of expectations from what our district directors will tell them. Most of our 77 counties are pretty rural, and they have only a single extension educator in them. And so those people handle all of the cooperative extension service duties. So they do ag, they do 4-H, they do family consumer science. We do have more people in the metropolitan counties, and so they're obviously split up those duties. But generally speaking, they are expected to handle part of their job is to dedicate to CED efforts. So, like I said, in the past, we've had a few counties with full-time educators. They were able to dedicate funding to that position, but currently we don't have any. And so you can see the expectations of current educators. They're supposed to give 5 to 10% of their time specifically for CED efforts. And as you might expect, some really like that, and they openly embrace it. They seek out our programming. They constantly email me and Nody with ideas. Others are not so enthusiastic. You can consider maybe someone with a more of an ag or a 4-H background is not going to embrace some of the things that we're trying to do, particularly if it's tech savvy and they're not tech savvy people. But they are expected to document their CED efforts in annual evaluations. And so I'm just trying to give you guys a feel for what's happening here in Oklahoma, and then I'll move into kind of what my own experience has been. So, I came here to OSU in kind of the late 2000s, and when I started, I had a 100% extension appointment. And so I built a couple of extension programs, but the one I want to talk about here is this the e-commerce workshops that I really piloted at that time and did a lot of work on. And you can see Here on the right, this is the different workshops that I built. These were, between full day and half day sessions. They were all hands-on in nature. We had I'll talk more about the participants over time, et cetera. And then that kind of ran its course. And in 2015, I transitioned to a three-way split over that time and kind of changed to a new extension program that I'll talk about, which is this Rural Library Hotspot Loan Program. And I kind of want to emphasize there that three-way split, as you might expect, I had to spend more time researching and teaching, so that a little bit of time away from what I could do in extension. So I'll go through each of these and kind of try to give you guys a feel for how I interacted with the county and area personnel during those times. So starting off, again, this is the first program that I set up, the e-commerce program. The idea is these were for small business owners. We had kind of typically 3 or 4 hour hands-on sessions with around 7 to 10 participants typically. We either brought our own mobile computer lab. We had, I have lots of memories of hauling big packages of laptops in the trunk of my car. Or we partnered with a local facility that had computers that we could borrow and use. And these were delivered with our area specialists. So the 2 people that I mentioned in the East and the West, they came to every single one of these. They gave half the presentation. We always invited our county educators. A lot of them really participated. They went to the classes. They answered questions and asked questions and helped promote. Sometimes some of them didn't show up. So it really was kind of a mixed bag in terms of what they were able to contribute. So I should note that I still have vivid memories of the first time I tried this completely on my own. The first workshop I held, I promoted it for like 4 weeks, and I really was involved with the county educator, and 2 people showed up. And so I gave a 4-hour workshop for 2 people. And so I kind of figured out I needed a better way of doing it. And so I partnered with a statewide economic development organization called REI, Rural Enterprises, they're called. And they had their own network of small business owners that they routinely worked with. And so from then on, they got me a crowd, and I just showed up with the area specialists and with the county educators, and we put the program on for them. That was much more successful for me. So here is the program that we ended up running. This ran from late, around 2008 through 2015. We did a lot of workshops. We did typically 1 or 2 a month. Like I said, the area specialists were heavily involved. We had over 1,000 attendees, lots of positive feedback. We actually won an AAEA award back in 2013. You can kind of see how many we ended up having. So we had 30 of these small business website workshops with 500 attendees. I showed people how to install PayPal on their websites and start taking payments. We had 200 attendees. We did like different options for online storefronts, Etsy, eBay, Amazon storefronts. We had almost 200 there. And then search engine optimization was a big one too. We did a lot of those workshops over time. So this was a lot of my extension programming over that time. And here's kind of some of the programs. I think that was supposed to be animated up here, but it didn't happen. So you can see here's some sample materials from our hands-on workshop. Here is the agenda for the small business website. We actually did some storyboarding, and they actually built a site, using an online tool to actually construct a simple, 2-3 page website that they could run themselves. You can see over here on the other part, I've got a PayPal introduction. So we did some examples of how to install these, buy now buttons and get your transactions where you could actually have money deposited and things like that. Another example up here is the different online presence strategies. So we did a lot of these over time. Here's some pictures of me, giving some of these programs. Over here is one of our area educators or area specialists. He was, again, like I said, helping present. We always had the computers there. We traveled a lot. We had our projector, and we just went in whatever room we could get and worked hands-on with people. So that kind of phased out around 2015. I thought I had a slide here, but I guess not. And so the next program it kind of ran its course. Honestly, we basically hit all the counties we could, and we were kind of redoing the material. We said, okay, we've kind of helped everybody we think we can. Let's transition to a different approach. And this new program that I've been running since then partners with libraries in rural parts of the state, and we loan out these hotspots up here that some of you may have seen. It works just off a cellular connection, and the libraries loan them out to people that don't have their own internet connection. We pay for the device and unlimited data for the first year, and then we ask the library to take over those payments in year 2. We typically add between 4 and 5 libraries each year. They don't get a ton of devices. They only get 5, 6, 7 devices, but that's a great fit for these rural communities. And we do make them collect a survey when the devices are returned. Like you said, we're at 15 libraries right now. You can see a map. There's not great coverage in western Oklahoma, which is one reason we don't have a lot of partners out in western Oklahoma. The cell coverage is pretty poor. And 12 of the 15 have been able to continue on their own dime once the program's been up and running. So just some quick statistics about that. We're averaging about 160 loans per library per year. People love them. They want them for more than a week. We are hitting the target demographic. Most have incomes less than $50,000. A significant percentage have a high school degree or less. We get great comments about people, helping their kids with schoolwork, searching for jobs, connecting with their family. And we did win an ACTEP award last year for this. So I was glad to see that recognized by a couple different organizations. And so here's some pictures. This is a county educator. I got a couple county educators in here. There's a district director over here. These are a county educator sitting down with some librarians. And so they've been involved. But really, it's just kind of promoting the material. It's not like they have something to deliver or a regular meeting or anything like that. So I did have some conversations here recently. I was actually just last week with a future program, and we're actually trying to address more than just connectivity. We recognize that some people are trying to, fill out resumes on a smartphone, and we realize that it's difficult to fully participate in school or the job market on a limited device like a smartphone. So we're trying to construct what I'm calling a laptop donation program. We still have a problem with people that don't have usable computers, and there's lots of unused computers even here in my own office and laptops that I haven't used in 2 years that are just sitting there. So I've proposed this with our leadership. We've run it by a few county educators. They're going to try to start accepting used laptops, both from businesses and individuals. We're going to either refurbish them with our own IT people or with an organization that does that, and then help to redistribute them back locally. So again, it could be a 4-H household or other nonprofits that can help do that. And the Kansas City Fed has actually been really, really good at leading this program. We're kind of building on their what they've been able to accomplish. So just in terms of looking forward, my current programs really have limited ongoing interaction with the county educators that are out there. I do contact them when needed. When I add a new library, when I want them to promote an existing program, I get in touch with them. Like I said, most of them are very accepting of what we're trying to do, or they contact me when they need it. A lot of them actually have asked for devices and they want their own hotspots. They have questions about it. And as you guys well know, the pandemic has really brought a focus on the whole digital divide and connectivity issues. And so it's kind of cool that we're actively addressing that. I do think this new program will provide more regular contact. If we're going to check in with the participants in terms of how many laptops they've been able to get, help them promote it, help them distribute it back in the community. I think that would be a little bit more regular interaction with the extension personnel. And just to kind of close here, we are kind of in transition in terms of our overall CED programming. Dave Scheidler was a huge asset we had here, and we just lost him last year with the new position with the Heartland Foundation. He was doing some really innovative programs with retail and entrepreneurship, and frankly had a better connection with a lot of county educators than I do. So we'll see how that goes. We haven't had an opening to replace his position yet. And then Nodi's county training program, where he actually has courses for county commissioners and county treasurers and things like that. That's been successful for the past 10 plus years and continues to be. So we will see what happens. But I think that's it for me, Sarah. So I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Brian. That was a really nice overview of what CED extension looks like in Oklahoma over the last 10 years, and a really nice overview of your programs. We don't have any specific questions in the chat. Bridget Tuck said she's been really trying to promote this with the rural libraries in Minnesota. and getting traction for this program in Minnesota. So thanks for that comment, Bridget. Rebekka, Ashley, Francisco, would you like to get started with the second presentation? You're muted, Rebekka.
Thanks. Are you seeing my PowerPoint up?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Awesome. Very
Take
good.
away.
Okay, well, here in Texas, we actually have 2 extension community development programs. Prairie View A&M University CEP program, which is our 1890 here in Texas, has 4 community economic development specialists in Prairie View, which is the yellow star there in Southeast District 9. We do have 12 extension districts here in Texas. Across the state, mostly in areas with underserved populations, they have 43 county educators, including 3 community economic development county educators. On the AgriLife side, we're more of a loose interdisciplinary collection of people who are assigned to traditional academic units. Craig Carpenter, who also has an appointment at Michigan State, and I are in the Ag Econ department. We have a colleague, and we're based here in College Station in District 9. We have a colleague, Jamie Ray Walker, who is an urban park specialist in Dallas. And there are a few other people who would say that they do some community development in ag leadership, even some in family and consumer health, for example, on the financial management side. So when Dr. Waller turns in our report to the SRDC, it says there are about 11 FTEs, but really only about 3 or 4 of us identify as CRED specialists. And as Brian mentioned, our numbers are down. When I came here, I replaced 2, well, I don't want to say replaced because that's not really fair. I did not replace them. They were great and they were great colleagues in their retirement. But 2 people who had retired. And then when Craig came online, we'd had 2 additional people retire. So right now in the department, we have 1.2 FTE community development economists. I actually have a research appointment as well. So we have less than 1 extension community development economist in Texas Extension. Across the state, we do have 559 agents across all functions, which is great. They serve in 250 of our 254 counties, although they do serve people in all of the counties. None of those agents are community development specialists. And so much CRED work, because we use the old CRED acronym, Community Resources and Economic Development, is done through specialists. And if you were on the APLU community engagement call, or if you were just listening to Brian, collaboration is really key to being successful in our current environment and into having sustainable programs, including with non-academic institutions that value unbiased research and our outreach capabilities. Agents help us all the time. We do get, direct from community requests, but agents a lot of times pass along requests from their communities or their own requests about things that are going on. There is a regular Texas Community Futures Forum every few years that identifies issues across all 4 areas of extension. And even if we're just working with the community, a lot of times I always want the agents to know, hey, I'm working in your community and, hey, are there some things that I should be concerned about here? Like, what's the rest of the story? Because our agents are there, they're part of the community, they know what's going on. It's wonderful when we can work with agents as part of that traditional extension, community to agent to on-campus or area-based specialist model. But given that we don't have CRED specialists, and everybody has a community development job, but we're not even, a few years ago, you would have been required to have a community development plan in every county. That's no longer the case, which we actually think is a good thing. But it means that it's really important for us to tie our community development program to the agent's program areas, whether that's an ag program or a family and consumer health program, to make effective use of their time and their abilities to report. Usually we're working with agents who have longevity because they have their program areas with strong core programs already in place, and they really understand their community. Sometimes that's a challenge because we have a lot of agents in our agency with less than 5 years of experience. And so I get to tell you, or introduce you to Pancho, who is our North Texas ag economist who is working with some more experienced agents, as well as some of our non-academic institutions up there. And then after him is going to be Ashley as a CEP agent. And also I want to make sure to mention that she was the Texas Extension Specialist 2020 Community Development Agent of the Year, even though she's FCH. So Pancho, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rebekka. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pancho Abelló, and I am one of the district economists. I am the district economist here in District 3. We have 24 counties we work with, and we are about 5 hours away from our headquarters in College Station, Texas. So my idea today was to talk about how we count extension specialists and county agents, how do we work with local, regional, or district, community development programs. So for this, I was planning to use or talk about 2 examples. I've been here for 1 year, so these 2 examples, we worked last year. The first one is, how we can support extension and regional agencies. We did an analysis on the economic contributions of the Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension Center here in Vernon, Texas. And the idea of that is to show, because we work very close with our local, community development here in Vernon. So the idea is to show, okay, what is the impact that we have in our local communities, because we all know we work with state money, but we bring a lot of funds from different places. We bring grants, federal grants, and that has a huge impact in our community, increasing employment, and we spend the money here. So we work with them. We work close to them. They were, we were working on a project together on developing a peanut shelter for the research center. So this helped us, a lot to show the community how, important, and how, all these, relationships, how much money back we can bring to our communities. The other example I was planning to talk about is how we support, and this basically we work a lot with county agents with this, how we support district, regional, and local community economic development programs. And one of those examples is NORCEX, which is a community and economic development program that includes about 11 counties on our district. Thank you, Rebekka. So just a brief idea of what NORCEX is. It's a regional planning commission that brings together regional economic development organizations to analyze the regional economy, establish regional goals and objectives, and implement regional plan of action, identify opportunities, and assist in the local economic development efforts. What that means is a big group, a big committee. The membership comprises about 11 county governments, 35 school districts, 33 cities, 22 special districts. And we have people involved in the committee planning. We have county agents who are really, 11 districts who are really, involved on that. County judges, and there is a big committee. So these planning meetings, or these, or the members of NORCEX, what they saw is that there were less, agricultural businesses and related businesses has decreased in the area, and there was less production diversification. So after a survey that they did with local farmers on these 11 districts, they find out is what farmers wanted is to increase, the marketing channels, help them, NORCEX to increase their marketing channels. And of course, NORCEX responds to that survey, and they have different ideas, and they come up with basically now 2 ideas on how to increase their marketing channels. And that's how we county agents and on our specialists, how we help them on this process. So first thing that they asked us to do was to develop a feasibility study for NORCEX of a livestock processing plant. This was going to be located in one of these 11 counties. And the idea of this was to increase, help them, ranchers to have another, sell their cattle, their beef cattle, or their sheep or goats, and increase their margins, and also increase the employment in our area, okay? There was a lot of challenges when we work with, with this, with NORCEX or with any of these, big commissions. And we have a lot of challenges. we have to be very flexible, and we know that. And sometimes I think that the biggest challenge that we have is that we are usually not the ones who, deliver the best news. Okay, so when we all have all these big ideas, we are like, from the economic point of view, we start, making numbers, and so we need to go back and decide how we are going to send the message. So we are not the bad news. We are trying to help them to get, to define the best way for their project is. So the other challenge that we saw is that probably their timing is not the timing of theirs is not our timing. And during the process, usually on these big committees, things change. We might have some, during the process, they might have different ideas, and we have to adapt to those ideas while we are in the process, and have to support them the best way. So we work with them, we give them an analysis of these price margins between live weight and carcass weight that we have during the last so many years, and on beef cattle and sheep data. And we also help them, we develop a decision aid where they can able to analyze, okay, how much cattle do I need if I want to, how many heads of sheep or cattle do I need for a certain gross margin that, that will work. So give them certain tools so that they can define much better what their ideas are and how to get to those ideas. And that's how we work to support them. And even with all these changes on how do we work, we start with feasibility study with Rebekka, working with other people from our department, and also working with from other departments like in animal science, and putting this big group together. They are also working on doing developing a website to help farmers and ranchers to market their products. We do have some experience with that. We worked before with a market maker in Texas and Market Ready also in Texas. So we are part of their committee on when they make those decisions. So we're helping to support, given what we have on our experience, what is the best thing or what they need to do to help them as much as they can. So,
Jill. Ashley? Hi. So I know we're talking about North Texas, now we're going down South Texas, the border, but one thing that I think is highly important, especially working in a border town and, some areas that, in the outskirts is very rural, is really implementing, CED projects in order to improve the access to fruit and vegetables, because a lot of these rural areas don't have, even the access to the essential needs, such as running water, electricity, or transportation. So as an FCH agent, in order for me to go in and educate about, you need to improve, your vegetable intake or your fruit intake, or drink more water, things like that. They don't have the necessary essential needs in order for them to change, their lifestyle little by little. So that's a big challenge that I overcome here as an FCH agent, as an educator, when I go teach these programs to, the underserved population here in Webb County. So like I said, the CD projects does help us change healthy behavior by changing the access to safe spaces and nutritious food. And also both CED and FCH goals is to improve the quality of life within an individual and in a family. So it is very important that, and I'm very thankful that we have, these type of projects to help improve just a little transportation, starting a community garden, starting, something in order for them to access fruit and vegetables. A lot has to do with policy, I believe, policy, a system. I know I am very thankful for my coalition, my task force, as for the CEP FCH division. I have a task force between 15 to 20 members of different organizations out in the community who strive for the same thing, who strive for the same goal. So for me, I'm very thankful because it makes it a lot easier to let's implement this change. We talk about it, how we're going to implement it. So they also believe that, there's a lot of need for CD projects here in Webb County. And I kind of cover a little bit of everything CD, FCH in a way, because the nearest CD agent is about 2-3 hours away from Webb County. So it kind of makes it harder. Some of these projects that we're working right now with the CDC WOW-E projects is with our local university here, Texas A&M International University. They have a food pantry and they provide food and goodies to those students who are just attending the university. You don't have to be housed there. And they're also starting their own little garden that will be used for that food pantry. So that was neat of them. And then we're also incorporating a lot more projects in there. And also another organization I've been working with is a Southwest Key program, which focus for at-risk youth in a certain area code here in Webb County. And they really want to improve the walkability in the south side of Laredo. A lot of times, it's safety, it's weather. We reach up to 112 degrees here in South Texas. So, and a lot of, these sidewalks you're not able to walk in. So they're really excited about that. And, they really want to make a change in the community. I feel like the youth is actually the voice and they can make that change if they're, if we all have, helped each other out in this cooperation.
Thanks, Ashley. Well, just in summary, from this perspective, and as I visited both with community development economists and other extension economists across the nation, sometimes of the frustrations that we have is that community development impacts can take a long time. And a lot of times the credit is not ours. One example that I've got up here is something that several of us worked on. It took more than 3 years to get the job done. Another one, we managed to help them save their funding in 3 weeks, which was great. But a lot of times, and Brian mentioned this as well, the outcomes are really in seeing what communities learn that they can do themselves that they didn't know they could do. So in a changing environment, really collaborations are essential, balancing the range of services that we offer and the timelines along which those services deliver impacts that can be measured and reported, and then also providing service to the agency. Those are really the things that seem to keep us going right now. I will stop my share.
Thank you, Rebekka, Pancho, and Ashley. That was really awesome. And I really appreciate, especially Pancho and Ashley, who might not normally participate in CRED activities. I think it's really important in this discussion where we're talking about state specialists and county and area and regional specialists working together to have you here. So thank you. On that note, I'll now turn it over to Dr. Mallory Rahe and Dr. Stephen Mukembo, University of Missouri. Mallory is a state specialist here within the CED program, and Stephen is a county educator. He actually did his PhD at Oklahoma State and took a class from Brian Whitacre. So we're excited to have you here too, Stephen, also sharing the county educator experience. Take it away.
Okay, thanks so much, Sarah. I'm here to talk a little bit about how the University of Missouri has evolved, and I've only been here a year. So this is what community economic development looks like at our university. It's under the Business and Communities banner in Extension, and we have a lot of subcomponents, everything from business development, which houses our state's SBDC network, through community, workforce, regional, and then agriculture business policy. So I work in the CED under the regional, where we have 3 faculty members. I'm also currently the educational director for the Ag Business Policy Group, which pulls together business and communities extension as well as a piece of the agriculture and environment extension program. And the new thing for us was the investment in 44 off-campus positions focused on community economic development. And this occurred after a 2016 statewide tour by our Vice Chancellor, Marshall Stewart, who really saw the need to emphasize community economic development and made that investment. So when you look at capacity in Missouri, this is what our map looks like. Here are the 44 off-campus positions. These are county engagement specialists, or CED, CESs as we call them. Roughly half their job is to run the office, and the other half of their time is spent doing engagement and programming within community economic development. They cover these responsibilities for between 1 to 4 counties. They work in small teams with 4-H and nutrition community engagement specialists, and 20 of these positions have an ag focus. We also have 3 field specialists in community economic development. And really with our model, our field specialists are encouraged to take on sort of a statewide role and area of emphasis and offer programming statewide. When you look at state specialists, business and communities is broad here at Missouri. So we have 3 in regional, 2 in workforce, 2 in community development. And our state has 8 extension regions. So after we've made this big investment in off-campus faculty, that was really to better connect campus and communities, which I think is a perennial struggle in extension. And for us, it's been, okay, how do we leverage and learn how to collaborate across the state? In October of 2019, there was this deliberate push to do more social media work across extension. And so I want to talk to you today about some things that we have tried as CED, an on-campus state specialist focused group. And specifically, I want to focus on this idea of how we've worked to centralize content creation on campus and get that out across the state to more effectively build an audience. So I think in this day and age, it's never enough to just do that analysis or write that publication, but you have to get it in the hands of people who will use it. And we're really looking at how do we collaborate with our off-campus faculty to do that. So I want to focus on one of our products, the Missouri Economy Indicator Brief Series. This is something we started in response to COVID. The first issue came out on March 23rd, and we've released an issue basically every 2 weeks after. These are 2 pages, 2-page PDF. Here are the topics that we have covered to date. And when you look at what's the impact of this kind of work, I have a few metrics that I want to share with you today. So we're measuring impact by the people that we drive to our website in the orange bars and the people who actually download that PDF in the gray bars. And unfortunately, the web team were not able to capture the downloads for our last 3 issues. So that's unfortunate. And then when you look at our own social media platforms that we manage centrally on campus through CED, we see that we were able to produce 7% of our total views and downloads. So it's really important that we're able to find other ways to get our information out. So something that we did was, and we did this on issue 5, was putting together a social media packet. So this is an example of one of our posts that we would do. And sometimes counties would reshare that material if they saw it. But what we did to make it easier for our off-campus faculty to raise awareness, spread the message, and also use this content with their audiences is that we take all the components that we use to put together this social media post and put it in an email. And we provide a short PowerPoint, 4 to 5 slides that walk our educators through the data source, how to interpret it, and how they can access the data, because some of this data gets updated on a weekly basis. So if they want to go back and look in and see the update, they can do that. And I'll tell you, the PowerPoint only goes to our internal audience. So not everyone has shared these social media packets. We had our undergrad kind of do a survey before this presentation looking on Facebook pages, but issue 11 was shared 8 times. The next issue was shared 12 times. So it does vary. And when we look back at, okay, how have we built an audience over time? What are the things that we have done? I wanted to share that our highest views came from our very first issue. And that was because this issue had a presentation that launched this division-wide, so we're in the Division of Applied Social Sciences, a division-wide webinar series throughout the state. So it was heavily promoted. We got a lot of people who watched that webinar and at least went to the website, and then far fewer who actually went ahead and downloaded that PDF to learn more. We did an internal webinar on issue 3. You can see issue 5, when we started the social media packet, we really increased the audience for this material. We did some website redesign to make things easier to find with Google search engines. And then when we did another presentation on issue 10, you can see a small bump on people who come to the web, but not nearly like the first presentation. But again, if you see how the time series is progressing, everyone has kind of waning interest in some things, and there's lots of webinars as COVID progresses. But what's critical for us also to think about is that issue 9 and 11 are based on data that's only updated once a year. So we need to think strategically about how we promote these pieces again, given that, you know, this information is important when it first comes out, but it has a longer shelf life. So we need to continue to put that in front of audiences. And issue 8 was the week of 4th of July. So that might explain why this issue did particularly poorly, or the topic wasn't of interest. Lots of things at work here. So if we break this down a little bit within our internal social media platforms, you can see Facebook and LinkedIn. And while we have more followers on Facebook, and Facebook is the preferred social media platform among our county extension offices, internally for Exceed, we do much better with our LinkedIn audience. We exceed the impressions. We get more views than we have followers on LinkedIn, and this is people who it shows up in the scrolling feed. And then if you look at the people who actually click on something, that's the axis, the smaller axis over here on both graphs, we have a much higher click rate on LinkedIn than we do Facebook. And, you know, it was only in pulling these analytics that we have this interesting trend that we see strong drop off on Facebook in terms of the number of people who will see a post and then go ahead and click through either to the website or directly to the PDF. So that's just something for us to think about as we build audiences. And is this strategy working? Well, you know, I don't have anything strongly to compare these numbers to, but it is interesting to monitor this. And we're also doing this in ag business policy for various things. We're trying to see, do we get better responses to statewide surveys? Do we get more people to look at sort of our signature reports? Can we build audiences for things? When we do research and we also do a video, can we build a better audience base? But here's some feedback from our off-campus faculty. This was unsolicited in emails after we send these things out. And one of the really important reasons that we started doing this is we wanted to build data capacity throughout our organization and build awareness of community economic trends. And during the pandemic, how do we understand our economy and how it's changing? And so we do feel good that in some ways this is working. It's not necessarily had as broad spread across the full 44 faculty as we might want it to, but that's something that we can continue to work on. So going forward, we're focusing on reposting material that's less time sensitive, continuing to find better social media partners to access their audience base, and thinking strategically about how we build our LinkedIn audience base. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen, who will reflect on a particular program that came out of Exceed as well.
Thank you, Mallory. I'm not able to advance a slide. Would you help me, please? Okay, next slide. Yeah, so building on what Mallory has shared, one of the biggest challenges we have encountered in Missouri is that we've not yet recovered from the 2008-2009 Great Recession, and that has been made worse by this pandemic. If you look at this map, about 55 counties in our region lost both jobs and the population. 29 gained population, but they lost their jobs, those are in turn. And then the pink, they show that they gained employment, they gained jobs, but they lost the population. And only 20 out of other counties were able to gain both population and resilient. Remember, this was designed before COVID, and the situation could be very different now. And so most of the challenges we've encountered are mainly in our rural areas. And so that's where we see lots of the biggest challenges. So when we look at our rural areas, most of the jobs in Missouri are three out of 10. They are provided by the new businesses in our communities. And if you look at these communities, if you look at economic development, these rural communities do not have the resources to rely on attraction as a driver to drive economic development. And so because they do not have that cooperative advantage to attract industries into these communities, they have to rely on local assets and prevailing entrepreneurs to grow their local economy. And so if we had to rely on this, one of the things that we thought about is strengthening the local entrepreneur networks within the communities so that that human capital could be the asset to drive economic development. So through these networks, communities in rural Missouri are able to build strong entrepreneur networks to help strengthen the ecosystem so that they create an environment where entrepreneurs can thrive and flourish. And so we designed a curriculum that we piloted in two different areas to see how best can we use the strength of the network in the ecosystem to create an environment where entrepreneurs can thrive, and so that we use that as a driver to make our communities become more resilient. Because one of the things that we understand is that if somebody who has a local business is able to prosper, they're less likely to leave their communities to go to another place. But if we rely on attraction to bring in new communities, if we go through our downtowns, then most likely, as you attract and give them incentives, some other community might attract them. So it's better to build your own local base than relying on attraction. So that's kind of the message that we are trying to share with our stakeholders through this network analysis. So what did we do? We designed a pilot program that initially this was meant to be a 6-hour program that was supposed to be an in-person training. However, because of the COVID situation, we had to pivot, and we kind of reduced the aspect of the training to make it suitable for 3 to 4 hours. So we did it via Zoom, and we did one in Northwest Missouri and one in Wisconsin. And we engaged participants in various areas. One thing that we did is that every time the participants logged in prior to the training, we encourage them to draw kind of what is their network and who is within their network. And then when they went through the training, post the training, they also did the network. And so they had to compare pre and post to see how much they've gained in that aspect. So one thing that we got from this training that it's very early to kind of from pilot project to determine if there's been a big impact on this aspect. But one thing that we realized and learned from the feedback from the people who attended is that one, they were able to realize that they can build a stronger network from this network map. And so they say that they were going to come together and compare all the maps that each individual was able to develop and come up with a regional map that will help strengthen the networks in the ecosystem. And so with that, they would be able to kind of create an environment where everybody is able to know who is who in the network and who can support the entrepreneurs, so that if somebody is interested in starting a business in that community, they know who to reach out for support to kind of help them prosper in the community. And so, next slide. So that's basically the gist of that. And so one of the things that with the new changes in the way our extension is carried out, one of the things is that the field faculty like me, we are required to do kind of a needs assessment to identify the needs in the community, and then we reach out to the specialists at campus, and we kind of work together to develop new solutions that will be aimed at developing those solutions to those needs. So instead of having a top-down approach, we always have engaged in a bottom-up. We identify the needs, work with the specialists, and then engage the communities in helping them come up with innovative solutions to meet their own needs. And that's something that we experienced through this building of entrepreneur networks. We worked with a community, and this involved, we had regional economic developers, we had representatives from the regional planning commissions, we had the members from the chambers of commerce, and so we shared with them knowledge on how to build their networks to come up with their own solution, to come up with a map that they can use to address their ecosystem. And so by engaging these three, we have the field faculty, engaging with the campus faculty and the community, it helps us to come up with practical solutions that are relevant to our communities where these people are working. So that a kind of engagement, one thing we saw is that it's more productive and people are able to come up with solutions that are applicable to their own needs in their local communities. And so that's something that we identified from this whole process.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And I just wanted to point out that on that homegrown program, that is a program that Stephen and a couple other county educators, both in Missouri and Wisconsin, partnered with state specialists in Missouri, myself, and Wisconsin, Tessa Conroy, to develop that program. And so I think that's a neat example of us working together. And Stephen hit the nail on the head with his discussion about how well that works, because he's engaged on the ground, we're engaged in the academic literature, and we can together meet a nice middle ground in some applied research and some applied solutions for communities. So thank you, Stephen and Mallory. Thank you, Rebekka, Pancho, and Ashley. Thank you, Brian. I'd now like to open it up to discussion. We haven't had any specific questions in the chat. Steve Deller did post a question for us to reflect on. Steve, would you like to pose that question again with audio?
Yes, thank you. I appreciated the presentations, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm wondering what is, a lot of folks that work in Extension are very passionate about the work they do. And I'm wondering what is kind of your thoughts around is there a line, and if there is a line, where is the line between education and advocacy?
Well, this is just my point of view. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
No, that's all right. Go ahead, Rebekka. I'll follow you.
All right. There's definitely a line. I think it's a different spot for every person. I think for those of us who do economic impact analysis, it's easy to say that in some ways that is advocacy. With in-plan, the number is always positive if you put in a positive number. When we follow established methodologies, make conservative decisions, and do our best to provide data, and to, in our reports, report the data and the findings. And there are times I will tell my clients, you know, I'm giving you a report. If you want to say that kind of stuff, you're going to have to write a PR piece later. That's not what I do. We just did something that was geared toward both Texas government agencies and the New Mexico legislature. We and my colleagues at Texas Transportation Institute produced a very conservative report. In fact, I waited to see whether they'd put the numbers out in the media or not, and they did. We produced a report. We knew full well that the PR team out of, I think, DC was picking up, or Virginia was picking up that report after we were done with it. But it's our job to produce information. That's how we maintain credibility. Obviously, there are always questions there, but that's my take.
Yeah, I generally agree. You know, if you think about my programming in the past, it's much more focused on just education, the e-commerce workshops. We were telling people, here's how you build a website. There's not much advocacy that goes on there. There is a little bit more with the hotspot program because we're talking about, you know, the importance of digital inclusion. We're giving people free devices. We're saying, hey, we need laptops. You know, we'd like to see some of that, but we never cross the line and explicitly say, hey, legislature, fund this. Now, Steve, you well know this, the recent piece we published on broadband policies could very well be taken as advocacy where, you know, we've come out and said, hey, these are the policies that seem to have an influence on broadband availability. But like Rebekka said, all we can do is say what the research shows. And that's what we're trying to do is state the numbers that what the research has shown. Of course, we're often asked to, you know, push that into what it means for policy, but we try, you know, when we present this to extension-oriented audiences, we're saying this is just what the results found. You know, these policies had an impact, these didn't. You know, take that, like Rebekka said, and make it your own. So we try not to cross that line, and I know my colleague Roberto Gallardo at Purdue is very concerned with that. Is, you know, not letting people, not pushing our research as an advocacy position. But that's something I think we all need to be aware of.
Yeah, I'll just chime in too. Of course, I was with USDA for 10 years before coming to Extension, before coming to Mizzou. And so the controls at ERS, which was a federally designated statistical agency, we're under very tight control. I mean, we literally couldn't even be on the phone with media without a public relations person babysitting. So to me, it has been a very interesting experience coming into academia. When I first got here, there was a specialist in my area who just really was a true advocate. He was out advocating. He got in trouble several times. And I was his supervisor. It was a nightmare. And so that really put a sour taste in my mouth for the advocacy piece. But I think, like Rebekka and Brian said, I think it's very important to stay research-oriented, fact-based, but it is very difficult because people are very passionate about this. And I think, like Stephen Deller said, we're all here because we're very passionate about rural areas, about economic development. So it is tough. Any comments from attendees or other panelists? Stephen?
You know, one of the things that I see, you know, the extension, we are tasked with providing that research-based information to our stakeholders. And so I'll use an example. Like for us, we have an area that we have like data for decision makers. We get the research that comes from the university, and then we share that with our commissioners and other people in the community. So they themselves take on that role to engage on the advocacy part, you know? So we give them the facts, help them understand the facts. And so it's up to them to see how they use that to meet the needs of the community through that advocacy component.
If there are no other questions, I'd like to ask a question of our county and field faculty. So Ashley, Pancho, Stephen, do you have any tips? A lot of us on this call are state specialists or our PhD academics. Do you have any tips for those of us who aren't doing as much engagement as you are and how we can better collaborate with you? Pancho? Oh, Ashley, sorry.
I think it just goes back to like the whole question between education and advocacy. I mean, I go back to my coalition just because I have such a strong coalition of different members that aren't even, you know, part of any outreach organization or anything like that, but they still advocate for what they believe in and they're very passionate about. So I guess it's also a lot different when I talk to specialists, like especially up in headquarters, and I ask for a certain presentation or a certain thing. They don't know the challenges as what an extension agent goes through at times, especially the material that we get, especially in South Texas, like in Webb County, material, like for example, there's that language barrier of not having a lot of information in Spanish, you know what I mean? And then also it goes to a lot of factors. And, you know, I've spoken to USDA about this, you know, a lot of times we want to deliver a program, but it's not in the right, you know, language, you know, we speak down here. And if it is, it's just in the general Spanish. But a lot of these, you know, participants, their Spanish is not as strong, or it's not the correct, I guess you could say, quote unquote, you know, Spanish that we speak down here. So there's a lot of factors, but I mean, it just tips is just, you know, just really just be an advocate. And I feel like we all are in this position because we all have that passion to, you know, improve the community as well. And, you know, Rebekka, she's real good, especially with the CDC grant, and, you know, Dr. Walker, Dr. Anding and stuff. And, you know, we're just a great team, and they understand an extension agent's point of view as well. So.
Thanks, Ashley. Stephen?
You know, one of the things that comes out of when you work with people in the field, there's that aspect that I shared in one of the slides, was that engaged scholarship, you know, whereby you are working with a field faculty that are on the ground and engaging with the community that are going to be the consumers of your research to co-create that kind of knowledge. So I think the work that comes from the specialists is more impactful when the community is engaged in the development of innovative solutions to their needs.
Thank you. Great. David Kay, I just promoted you to panelist. He had put something in the chat about public issues education, and Rebekka responded that Arkansas was doing that. David?
Yeah, thanks. I asked that. I was involved particularly with a group of state specialists in the 90s and 2000s that sort of used that framework for addressing topics which were controversial in particular, which tends to be where you get in trouble with advocacy. You don't tend to get in trouble advocating for non-controversial topics. And I know that within our system, within the past few years, there's been an effort to sort of resurrect some of that approach, particularly Paul LaChapelle at Montana has started a webinar series about that. But, you know, I'm an old guy. You all look a lot younger than I do, and I'm just, almost all of you at least, and I'm just kind of wondering whether that tradition has any resonance currently within sort of the work that's being done. And then also just comment on the advocacy perspective, like in the work I was doing, it was very clear that in certain contexts, people were expected actually to be advocates in certain contexts. Like their jobs were to advocate for agriculture at the county level in certain ways, and they had. So it was like, it's not just like everybody in every position within extension was like staying away from advocacy. I mean, my first job was educating about, but I would say advocating for composting on the part of municipal governments. So I think that we need to be a little careful about thinking about how we even define what advocacy actually means and contextualize it.
That's a great point, David. I will say, coming to Missouri, I felt at least that the culture was a little bit more for extension in advocacy than I was really comfortable with. Judy Stallman, who many of you know, recruited me here to Missouri and then promptly retired. But she liked public issues education. She was staunchly a supporter of the research-based and translating that research as opposed to the advocacy. So I kind of miss having her around. I'm lucky that she lives in my neighborhood, so I get to walk by and visit with her often. But maybe we should bring her back and discuss that a little bit more. I appreciate you bringing that up, David, and Steve Deller also for bringing up that comment. Other questions or comments for the panel?
Let me just add on to that, Sarah. I think maybe one thing we can do as you know, community and economic development professionals is learn a little bit from our policy colleagues. So here at Oklahoma State, we have several people that are actively involved in the policy field, and so they're doing things like telling people what to enroll their farms in, and you know, in the Farm Bill and things like that. And they always make sure to tell people, you know, just present them with options. And they you know, kind of try to get the facts as, you know, what, again, based on what the research shows. This is what Steve says. He says use research suggests instead of facts. But you know, they have a history of not, in my opinion, not advocating, but just telling people what their options are, and then, you know, providing them with data to support their own decisions. So I think we maybe can learn from them a little bit.
That's great idea, Brian.
And you can be very subtle in your advocacy by how you present those options. I mean, you can kind of stir the conversation in one direction without being blatant that you're steering it in that direction.
That's great, Steve. Any other questions, comments for the panel? Everybody's so quiet. Okay, I don't see anything else. Oh, I hear Craig Carpenter in chat just wrote, if a topic is controversial enough, even the education piece can be perceived as advocacy. He asks maybe of David and Steve, any thoughts on navigating those types of topics? So the question is, when you're trying to do education on a controversial topic, and any words of wisdom for us young folk? I don't know if I can be young. I turn 40 next week, so.
I'm a few decades ahead of you. So. Well, yeah, I mean, again, and I think that there is a tradition, that's exactly what this whole tradition of public issues education does deal with. And it, I mean, my summary, the way I think about a lot of what educators do, which isn't a direct answer, but if anybody wants to contact me, I have plenty of written resources to share on this kind of subject. I mean, I personally actually got trained about 25, 30 years ago as a mediator, because I figured that having those kinds of facilitation skills in dealing with conflict was something that would help me in my work. Because I was dealing with a lot of environmental and land use disputes, and finding that, you know, my ability to run an IO model didn't take me nearly as far as I wanted to go with the issue. So the only thing I was going to say is just sort of at a philosophical level, I think a lot of the role of what I do now, as opposed to what I used to do when I was just kind of using an implant expert, was to be able to create environments in which learning was possible, you know, when listening was possible. So, you know, in other words, just because I had some information to push out didn't mean that I was able to necessarily know how to do it in an environment where it was likely to be heard and used. So I spent a lot more time trying to create the environments in which information could be useful to the people I was working with, and less time on just trying to create the original information, which, you know, it's kind of opposite from what I would think of what a research appointment might look like, but in my extension role, that's how I thought about it.
If I can chime in, I'm going to get a sign made and put it on my door that says "Testing the limits of tenure." I think you have different roles between the state specialist and the county educators. I think the state specialists can maybe tackle these controversial issues a little bit more than local educators. I think local educators have to really have a very good feel of the pulse of their local community. And I don't think that they should be afraid of taking on controversial issues. But I can understand why some county educators would say, I just can't work in that area because it's, no matter what I do, is going to start a firestorm. And I understand that and I appreciate that. But I think that you got to have the institutions, you got to have the back of the institution. There have been a couple of times when I've stuck my foot in it, and thank God the chancellors of the different campuses had always had my back. And you take those as learning opportunities. But yeah, there will be, particularly in today's political environment. I mean, I just did a TV interview this morning, and the reporter was trying to get me to say, you know, how's the politics of ag policy working out in Wisconsin? And as soon as the reporter kept pushing the politics of it, I begged off. And I said, I'm an economist, I'm not a political scientist. But half of me is like, I wanted to make a comment, but I knew just to avoid that.
I don't want to dominate if someone else wants to speak up.
Go for it, David.
based on the enormous respect I've had for Stephen Deller's work over many, many years, I would only agree with what he says almost ever. But I would just add to that you know, I think one of the things that people need to be careful about, that his comments reminded me of, there are two things. One of them is being cautious about using your position as an expert. You know, like I have expertise in input output analysis, a few other things, and like you know, I feel comfortable sort of speaking as an expert in those arenas, but I'm also aware that people are asking me, particularly as I've gotten older, for comments on things that I have no expertise in, that because I have expertise in one area, people will respond to me as if I have expertise in these other areas. So I think that it's incumbent upon, you know, particularly the press, the public, and you know, people, extension audiences, you know, how are they supposed to know that I'm not totally BSing my way through something? So I think it's incumbent on us to try and clarify as much as possible, you know, when it is that we're sort of speaking with, you know, with the expert hat on versus with another hat on. And then the second thing is that this issue of that Steve was also raising about like tenure versus non-tenure. Like I'm actually not I'm not in a tenure track role. I've actually worked mostly on soft money. You know, I've had a mix on projects for most of my career. So in that sense, I'm more vulnerable to, you know, not getting in trouble than I would be if I had tenure. And, you know, I think one of the skills that people need to develop is a skill of cultivating permission from the, you know, from the system they work in, from the, you know, the system of authority that they work in. So you need to learn to understand where the boundaries are, which is a reinforcement of what Stephen said, within your own context. And it's subtle, and, you know, I've certainly found the longer I've been here, the further I could push things. But, you know, I'm working right now, just for example, with a national, this is not with my economics background, but I'm working with a national program that's doing trainings to try and build capacity around the country. And it's called Coming Together for Racial Understanding. It's in response to the racial dynamics that have been happening in our country as a whole. And that's a really tough topic for a lot of systems to take on. And we've had to be, you know, in each state, there's a completely different environment about how far you can go with that kind of programming. And we actually originally started that programming, bringing state teams to our trainings, you know, with the idea that they would take sort of like a curriculum, or there's a choice of curricula, and they would go into community and work with it. But almost universally, the response we got from the state teams was, you know, we have to do this work to build space to do this within our extension system before we're really comfortable going out and doing this kind of work outside. So that's just like one example. And I will also mention that even though I got my degree and spent like 25 years in what used to be an ag econ department, I'm not in that department anymore. I'm now I moved to a sociology department for a while, and now I'm in a department of global development, which is really sort of much more cross-disciplinary than the environment that I worked in for like 2.5 decades in ag economics, which probably makes a difference about the breadth of the kind of work that I can do and sort of get, you know, not get fired for.
Thanks, David. That was a great discussion. And if folks want to keep this discussion going, we can use the CRENET listserv. There was one last question I wanted to pose to the panelists. We had a question from Harshada, who said, how do you balance your work in extension and research? Brian, do you have any comments on that?
Sure. So if you remember from my presentation, I started out 100% extension appointment. And so, of course, the expectation for faculty is still that you're going to publish something. And so at that time, I was really focused on, building these workshops, but I still made sure to at least have something publishable from it. And like I see Rebekka entered you in the chat, Harshada, and I'm very much the same way. Think about the questions that the people you're trying to impact in extension that they would like answered. So, a lot of my work on e-commerce was focused on broadband. And so I looked at, where broadband was available, how it was diffusing. I've written some Journal of Extension articles that focused on supply versus demand of broadband and then the hotspot program. So for me, I enjoy the research side of things. And so I pushed for a heavier research appointment. And so even today, they're very much tied together. Pretty much all my programming has links between research and extension. And for me, I actually take it in the classroom as well. I have a teaching appointment. I use a lot of examples from extension in the classroom. And so, honestly, you have to kind of think about, particularly if you're going up for tenure, you need to think about what your percentage of appointment is. Because if you have an 80% extension appointment and you're cranking out 7 journal articles a year, somebody's going to say, wait a second, are they really doing what they're supposed to be doing here? So think about what your appointment is and think about ways to tie, like Rebekka said, the needs of your extension audience with some research questions you can answer.
Great answer. Any other questions or comments on that? I have a research extension appointment, and I have tenure, but I'm very new to academia, so I'm very much still figuring out how to walk the line between the colleagues in my department wanting me to pump out research and our county engagement specialist that you heard about wanting me to pump out programming. It's a never-ending battle, and so I give about 40 hours a week to each. Any last comments? If not, I want to just really thank all the participants, all the attendees. This was a great session. I'm disappointed we didn't get to rendezvous in Kansas City, but the once a month check-ins with CRED have been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed getting to know David Kay, for example, a little bit better. So this is great. And we look forward to seeing everyone in October for the hemp session, and September 30th for the organized symposia. So that would ordinarily be an organized symposia at AAEA if we were in Kansas City on rural economic development policy and practice. So I'll be sending those out on the listserv. But thanks for joining us, everyone. Especially big thanks to the panelists, Hancho, Ashley, Rebekka, Mallory, Stephen, and David. Thank you. Bye, folks.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, thank you very much.